Molly and I were chatting about how long we've both been in Humboldt. And for my wife, Layla, and I, it's been about 5 years now. And I feel like I've hit this point where I feel like I've met just about everybody, and I recognize maybe about a third. So I see a lot of folks here that I'm happy to see. And because my father is here, I'll ask you all, please not to heckle me in front of my dad. Please do that on your own time when he's not around. Thank you so much. Okay, so jumping right in then. I'm going to talk a little bit about the past, present, and future of newspaper, and where we've been, where we're at, where we're going. First of all, this is just a little bit of my background. I've been in the newspaper business for 23 plus years now. Worked at the Washington Post for over a decade, for Hearst Media, through their major newspaper group, and traveled all over the country. As Bill said, I ran Lost Coast Communications for a while. I was very privileged to get to do that. And shout out to him, by the way, he's doing an amazing job. I then came over to NorCal Community Media in a twofold capacity. There are 15 newspapers from Monterey all the way up through Eureka in my division, and I'm in charge of advertising for all of them, but also publisher and general manager for the TimesStandard. And I've also written 7 books, and 4 of them are worth reading. Okay, so the past. The TimesStandard was founded in 1854, and since then we've been the only daily newspaper of record in Humboldt County, with an asterisk because we stopped, as you know, we don't put out a Monday newspaper anymore. At our peak, our circulation was about 26,000, which means the readership was a little over 50,000, a little more. Things have changed a lot, as of course you know. The business model for newspapers and a lot of traditional media was completely shattered in the early 2000s with the advent of the internet. What a lot of people don't know is that for most newspapers, about 75% of all the operating revenue came from the classifieds. So when Craigslist and Google and cars.com and homes.com and all the other classified directory types began to take over, we lost 75% of the gas in our tanks, and things had to really change. We couldn't shift to roll with that either fast enough or frankly correctly. When we, and I say we here, I'm speaking about newspaper in general, when the internet really began to take off, and I remember this, I was a kid at the Washington Post. Leadership pretty much came to us and said, so listen, we're going to launch this website version of the newspaper. It's going to have everything that the newspaper has and more. The advertising is going to cost about 1/10 of the same share of voice as print advertising does, and it's going to be free to subscribers and the general public as a whole. And a few of us timidly raised our hands and asked them if they were nuts, because that was going to completely cannibalize all of our revenue streams. And they basically said, don't worry, this digital thing will never take off. Huge mistake, obviously. So we're still re-equalizing from that bad acknowledgement of modern times. We're getting there, but it's been a tough slog. COVID, of course, has been a huge challenge to us, as it has been for most businesses, especially in smaller areas like ours. What revenue we do have left from advertising mostly comes from local retail, and of course they've taken a huge hit, so have we. Reader behavior has also changed a lot. People used to pay for newspapers and expect that. Now people expect everything to be free, but that's unsustainable. A lot of the free publications are, a lot of their content is taken from other places for which it is not free. It's very expensive to produce. So eventually they are going to run us down and then run out a lot of their own content. And a lot of people say, well, doesn't advertising pay for all of that? Unfortunately, it does not. Because advertising online is a commodities market, and it is, like most commodities markets, it tends to level out, but the prices get driven very, very far down. We've also seen a lot of attacks on expertise and authority in general, especially in the last 5 years, where more and more of the general public just don't believe anything that an authority tells them, specifically because that person or media source is an authority. And that can be a huge crisis as well when your business is putting out the information that people look to. Another big change, another big challenge for us is there's a lack of understanding of what makes real news. These days, anybody with a computer and an axe to grind can get online, create their own website, go through Facebook, you name it, a million sources. And if they're a halfway decent writer, they can say whatever they want, and people see it, they see that it's in print, and they think, well, that's real. Or someone who also publishes real things can pepper the truth with untruths, and people get confused. And so this, as we have seen more of a breakdown in our schools on focuses in academia on how to tell the difference, how to be a good citizen by being a responsible imbiber of news and information, that also is a great big challenge for us. The good news is that newspapers in print and online are still the most, if not one of the most trusted sources of information out there. And so we still trade very heavily on that. In fact, when we sell our advertisers, one of the things we tell them is that when you associate with the authority, you become the authority. That greater sense of trust is then transferred over to your brand. And that still works very well for us. So the future, of course, is unwritten, but I am hopeful. For example, people are always saying newspapers are going to die and all the rest of that. That's hogwash. Our print circulation, of course, is way down, but that's because everyone is online. I started this by saying at our peak, our circulation was about 26,000. Well, now on a good month, it's 200,000. And those people are all online. Because of that greater reach, it also gives us a greater ability to collaborate with the community. The reason one of the reasons why I came up here was when I was offered the job of running the Lost Coast Outpost, I was intrigued by the comments section. Kudos to Bill, by the way, for cleaning that up recently. I think that was an excellent move. But that level of community interaction that you can get, a little conversation going on below an article, we see it on Facebook for the TimesStandard, not on our site specifically. But that kind of interaction was never possible before. And that's very exciting to me. It also allows for, digital also allows for kinds of inclusions that we've never had before. I'll give you all an advance peek or a hint. We're about to launch a collaboration with a local media provider for free that we're going to put in front of our subscription paywall that will open up our content in ways that we never have before. And I'm writing a publisher's note and putting that out on Sunday, so please look for that. I think that's going to be interesting. All of this greater information, all of this greater access and greater reach leads to more information. And this goes back to first principles in journalism. The more information that we can give the populace, the more power that populace has to positively shape its own future. So as I see the technology change, even as print will eventually fade away, it's not going anywhere right away. There's a whole generation of folks who still count on it. But it will go. And when it does go, what it will leave is a greater reach and a greater potential for change through journalism than we've ever seen. And that makes me very excited and still very proud to be a part of this industry, even right here in little old Humboldt at the TimesStandard. So thank you again all very much for your attention. For those of you who read, thank you for reading. For those of you out there, Bill and Bob and Kevin who have added their own voices and their own hard work to the media in our community, thank you as well. I'm proud to count you all as colleagues. And I'm happy to stop blathering and take your questions. Let me stop sharing the screen here.
Thanks, John. That was great. You did a great job staying on track and on time.
I wasn't watching the clock, but the last time I did this thing, it took 45 minutes. So the slides help.
It looks like Jim has a question, and then we'll try to just kind of let it flow. So go ahead, Jim, and then Becky, you can chime in too when you're.
Thanks, Molly, and thanks again, John. I've been a 30-year subscriber. I just love having the physical paper in my hand in the morning.
I understand. Yeah.
I was curious with the moving the print, the actual printing out of our community. What's the nuts and bolts process? How do we get our paper in the morning? Do you guys send it there electronically and then it comes over in a semi, or?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a really interesting question. I used to give tours when we had the presses still at the Standard building, and you start in the newsroom and you say, here is where the information is collated and the articles are written up, and that's sent literally over fiber optic cables to what's called the hub, which is out of Chico, and they put the paper together. They lay it out, they paginate it, and they do that in concert with our designer and paginator who is here locally, a guy named Rory Hubbard who works with me, who's just top notch. And then once those digital pages are put together, they were then beamed back to Eureka, to our presses and our plate making machine, and the paper was printed and put on our loading dock every night around midnight. Our carriers would come and pick up their bundles, throw them in their cars, and off they'd go. Now, all of that same process happens, except that instead of sending the digital information back to Eureka's presses, which are no longer there, they just keep it in Chico and route it to the Chico presses, load everything onto a big semi truck, and then they drive the semi truck to Lakeport. We drive a semi truck from the TimesStandard down to Lakeport. The drivers get out, switch keys, and come back, and we still have our newspapers freshly printed on the loading dock at midnight, same time as if nothing has ever happened. And so far, it's been pretty good. We started doing this back in May, and we were one of the last newspapers in my 15 paper division to have our own presses. Every single one of those papers had their own press, but it didn't make sense to keep something that was so expensive to maintain and to run when we are frankly struggling as much as we are as an industry. I have to look for efficiencies wherever I can find them to help save as many jobs as I can and to help keep the mission going. It was actually it was a very difficult decision to make. The math was simple. That's never hard. That's a spreadsheet. The thinking about the 15 or 16 folks who we had to let go, that was hard. I worked very, very hard to look for other positions for them, both within our newspaper group and locally. I'm still working to do that, and we'll continue to work to do that until we find placements for all of them if I can, and for those who are interested. And losing the press itself was kind of emotional for me. When I grew up around the Washington Post, and I remember running around the press room when I was just a little kid. And when I got the job here, I was at the paper very late one night because I wanted to see it printing. And I remember standing on the catwalk looking down on that old press, and it was a dinosaur, but it was still wonderful, beautiful machine. And the gentlemen who were running it, the technicians, were like just master musicians playing this giant instrument, making all these little adjustments on the fly and all the rest of that. And I teared up a little bit because I thought, wow, this is now my responsibility. This is massive. And then, a year or so later, I realized that in order to maintain our mission, I would have to watch that thing go. And I stood on top of that same catwalk and I looked down and I watched them start to take it apart, and I cried again. And so it was a very difficult process, but I still stand by why we needed to do it. We still have a newspaper. It's still locally written. We're still doing everything we can to mission here locally for Humboldt, and we wouldn't have been able to do that if we'd kept it. And we're still managing to get the paper on the front porch at the same time every day, so that's good too.
Thanks a lot, John.
Sure.
I had a question because the one area that locally, and this is not just with the Time Standards, also with our local TV stations, is I don't know how many reporters you have in that, but the amount of news, local news in our papers and on our television seems to be going away. We have a lot of it. You watch the nightly news here on TV. Over half of it is, something that they've gone from out of the area. And I see that a little bit, and I do subscribe online. I do like the physical paper, but I finally had to go online, but I subscribe to it. And it seems that a lot of times I'm feeling like there has to be more local news going on that's just not making it to the paper. And so that's the only area that if I had my way, I'd love to see a little bit more because, I want to know what's going on in my community. That's just my
Of course.
sense.
No, I think anybody who wouldn't agree with you would be nuts. Of course we want more local news. And you're right, it's going away. There is less and less. And it is because of the economics that I was talking about before. It's interesting. It's hard to actually see it, comparatively speaking, in the newspaper because you've got this physical thing where you can count pages every day and there are fewer and fewer pages as we go. But I just read a study earlier in the year done by Neiman Labs, which is kind of the go-to for media studies, that talked about how newspapers are still the highest contributors in terms of locally generated original content in small markets over any other kind of media by story count. So, for example, I measure this very carefully. I encourage my journalists, and we have six full-time journalists now, to do 2 local stories every day. Now, that doesn't look like a lot in a newspaper that used to be 25 pages. And it doesn't look like a lot if you're looking at a website, which seems infinite because all the stories go all over the place. But versus TV, versus radio, versus strictly online, the story count from local original stories from newspapers, even though we only account for 25% of the total media in a given market, and in this one, because we're so blessed with so much media, probably even less, we're responsible for 50% of the original local content. So it's not as bad as it could be, but it is getting bad. It's not as good as it used to be, and we do need more. How does that get paid for? That's the problem. Yeah. In a business model where nobody wants to pay for it anymore. I talk about how. Well, thank you so much. But the vast majority of the people who read our site, 200,000 unique users on a good month. 250 when COVID was happening. The vast majority of them don't pay for it. And vast majority. They'll come in and get a couple of articles and then leave, and then come back later, and they get to it that way. And that's how most people imbibe their media now. In fact, most people don't go to a single even website. I'm kind of old-fashioned in that I get up in the morning, I have my coffee, I sit and read the paper, and I go online and I look at several other different sources. I love the LA Times. I read Fox News to see what folks right of center are looking at from time to time. I read the Washington Post because that's my alma mater, and I'm very loyal there. New York Times, etc. But most people don't do that. Most people get their news now from social media. They'll see a tweet from someone they follow that references an article and follow it in, or they'll see something pops up on their Facebook feed and they'll follow the article in that way and maybe look around a little while.
That's the opposite for Facebook. I wish it'd stop.
I'm of two minds on that. I believe that Facebook and Google owe major reparations to traditional media. They made a lot of their bones by linking to our stuff without having to pay for it.
Yeah.
We were the one, I was saying earlier, we were the ones who spent all this time and money and sent people to journalism school, etc., paid their salaries and their health care and all the rest. And then Google came in and gave it away for free. Facebook came in and gave it away for free. It was a devil's bargain. And we were initially like, well, that's fine. We'll take all the eyeballs you can give us. But it was one that ended up paying them more than us, a lot more. And I think Australia or New Zealand may have just, they're looking at, or they've passed a law demanding that Facebook and Google pay reparations to traditional media because they've damaged them so heavily. On the other side of that, I see social media as a great potential for good. You're talking earlier about how digital allows for a greater community impact and reach. I saw a Facebook thread just yesterday that I was talking with my wife Layla about it. I said, see, this is why social media is not all bad. Somebody was talking about how there was a person behaved poorly, and I don't want to drop any names or anything, so I'm going to be kind of abstract in my description. A person behaved poorly in a way that would hurt others. And a bunch of people called this person out in our little community by name, because it's Facebook and you have to use your name. And there was a back and forth. And I looked at that and I thought to myself, that level of accountability, it was once possible in tiny little villages where everybody knew everybody else. But, you know, people can hide now, except when they get called out on Facebook for being idiots. And this is what I saw yesterday. So there's some potential for good there, but there's also a lot of potential for harm. I suppose that's true for any very powerful tool.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna continue real quick. The one problem I have with Facebook is, you know, I didn't graduate with a degree in journalism, but I was in high school and stuff like that involved. And I strongly believe in truth in what you are printing. And that's where I get so annoyed with Facebook, is that anybody can print any, excuse my language, crap. And some people are just, I'm gonna be blunt again, so stupid that they think it's true, and that gets very frustrating, so.
Well, and I can't help but agree with you. And then, you know, I talked about that earlier when I was talking about the reader behavior, and reader sophistication has changed, and how it can be very dangerous when you've got something that's got as much reach as say a Facebook does, that's peppered with truth. You know, you've got articles from the Post and the New York Times and the Lost Coast Outpost and you know, the TimesStandard, and you got some true stuff in there. But then you also have the nutty stuff. As a matter of fact, I almost never post to Facebook. I'm more of a lurker than a poster. But the other day, I happened to see in my feed, somebody from the community said, hey, there was a show on CNBC where someone was being interviewed about their special forces son who had died. And in the interview, they asked the widow, what would you like your children to remember most about your husband? And she said, I would like them to remember his devotion to Jesus Christ. And in this post that was up on Facebook, she said, and they edited the stuff about God out, like they always do. They're always trying to hold us down, and they edit. And I read that, and I was just like, you know, this is NBC they're talking about. This is a good, solid, reputable media source. I don't believe that they would do that. So I went over to a website called Snopes.com, S-N-O-P, great website, been using it for years. And I did a quick search, and sure enough, it was baloney. And so I then went back and posted a link to Snopes. I said, I think you might have made a mistake. I was as polite as I could be, but this story is false. And I put a link to it. And she wouldn't believe it. You know, she refused. I can't remember the name of the psychological effect. There's been studies that say if you present somebody with contrary data to their point of view, as often as not, they will double down on the incorrect point of view, even when you show them proof to, and there's a name for it, but I can't remember what it is. And I saw that and I was just like, look at that, it works. But I went onto my own page and I told that story, again, a little bit more abstract. So I didn't want to call anybody out. But then, you know, posted a link to Snopes, and it was one of those posts that breaks the internet. You know, I had like 45 people in 10 minutes saying right on, and we love this, and all the rest of that. So Becky, you're not alone. And this is something that gives me hope, is that we are coming out of the dark ages of media. You know, people have been lied to for long enough, and we're getting wise to it. And I think it's going to be harder and harder and harder for the liars to lie and get away with it. It's still pervasive as all heck. You can't get away from it, that's for sure. And Facebook et al. Have a lot of responsibility to fix this, and they're only just beginning to start. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
Okay.
May I ask a question? Can I ask next?
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
One of the things I think is really great that the TimesStandard has been doing human interest stories on the front page. And I think that's really good, instead of the last person that got murdered on the front page. And I think that helps with our community and how they feel about themselves, and it's more positive. And that's something definitely that they do in Palm Springs. They make sure that they put the bad stuff at the back of the paper so tourists don't see that right off the bat. The other thing I wanted to mention is the North Coast Journal has their morning blog, and they capture from everywhere, including the TS TimesStandard. How do you feel about that?
Well, you know, I'm of two minds on that. You know, the blog model, which was popularized by, you know what, actually, Alex, before I answer that, I want to speak to the first thing you said about human interest stories and more positive stuff. For many years, I belonged to the camp of, if it bleeds, it leads. It's an old newspaper, you know, saying, and that is that everything we've always seen, all the evidence says, is that people don't really care that much about good news or human interest. They do a little, but mostly what they want to know is about what's broken. And I'll make my geneticist father proud of me by saying this. Human beings wouldn't have evolved to the state we've evolved to if we paid attention to the stuff that wasn't broken. You know, our brains direct us to what's on fire first, because that's what works. That was what was selected for. And I think that that is reflected in the way that we imbibe our media. We're more interested in what's broken. However, I've had enough people in our smaller community tell me in the last year that they wanted more good news that I finally just said, okay. About 2 weeks ago, the straw that broke the camel's back was a reader called me and she said, I want good news. It's all bad news all the time. Can't you do something, especially now? We really need something. And I thought, well, part of my mission is to reflect the community, and the community is telling me this. So I went to my editor, Mark Vowles, a very smart guy, and I said, Mark, how do we do it? And he said, let's put a slug on the front page that said, today's good news will be on page whatever, and direct people directly to a positive piece. And so we've started doing that, and people have really started to like it. Now, I think that we're always going to want to focus the news most on calling out what's broken, shining a flashlight on the things that need to be held accountable. But I got no problem pointing at least some of that flashlight toward.
Uh-oh. John, you're frozen.
Yeah, you went away, but thank you for that part.
That model is most directly associated with the Huffington Post. They're the ones who really popularized it, though they didn't invent it, of not really creating as much of their own stuff, but grabbing stuff from other places, getting the eyeballs to it, selling advertising around it, etc. It used to be that was great, you know, because if you're linking to me, that's helping with my search traffic metrics, and I'm showing up higher in Google, and I'm getting more people coming back to me and all the rest of that. But again, it's a devil's bargain. Eventually you get to a place where people don't need to go to the original source. They're not willing to pay for it, and the business model crashes. And eventually places like the North Coast Journal and the Huffington Post won't have anything to post that they don't create themselves, because they will have driven the rest of us out of business. Now, it may shift that because the revenue goes over to the blogs, that's just how it goes. And they end up and all of the newspapers are replaced with North Coast Journal blogs and Lost Coast Outpost blogs and all the rest of that. And they do some fine work. They really do. But it's not the same as a straight news newspaper. The reporting is different. The scientific method of reporting is not as rigorous. It's one of the reasons why I came back to it. So it's, you know, at this stage in the game, I guess I'd like to say, especially in a small community like ours, I want to help make sure that everybody survives and does well. There's room. There's enough advertising revenue, and the more media in a small community, the healthier that community is. I don't want the Outpost to go away. Heck, I put a lot of my life into that thing. I want to make sure it does well too. The North Coast Journal, they do good work too. You know, Mad River Union is a great little paper as well. I'm constantly impressed at how good some of the writing is that I see from the little news sources around in Humboldt County. When I came here, you know, after having worked for a very long time in major, you know, big city papers and things like that, I got to tell you, I'll be honest, I was a little snobby. I was, you know, I thought I wasn't going to be all that impressed. And I've been so wrong. I've been delighted with the level of professionalism and passion and just how good some of this stuff is. You know, how deep some of our local journalists have been able to dig and the value that they've brought to the place. I want us all to live through this. I want us all to buoy each other up. I don't want us to steal from one another, but if there is a way to find a balance where we can support each other and collaborate more, I'm all for that, absolutely. Kind of a long-winded answer.
I'd like to raise something. There's been a lot of complaint from the right about what they term the cancel culture. I mean, you've got the situation with Barry Weiss at New York Times. You've got editors who were forced out of the New York Times over a Senator Cotton editorial. So how real do you think that is? And if it's real, what can people in the newspaper business or those of us in other aspects of life do for dealing with it?
Do you know what, Michael, that's an interesting point. And you know what the whole cancel culture thing reminds me of is a reaction you often get from people on the right and the left and the center who pretend to be passionate proponents of free speech. You know, don't step on my speech. What they don't seem to understand is that while in this country speech is, you know, almost religiously protected as it should be, consequence goes along with that. You can say whatever the heck you want in the United States of America, and that's wonderful. And you better be ready to put up with what comes from it. So if you go out there and you say something that is offensive and hurtful or just stupid, and then a whole bunch of people get together and say, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. I'm canceling you. That is the consequence of your action. So no one's trampling on your rights. They're just reacting to you, to what you've said. So honestly, I think this cancel culture thing it's a buzzword, it's a watchword, and it's just consequence. Don't say something stupid, and there will be no negative consequences. Now, do I think that should shut people up because they're going to be afraid to get canceled? No, absolutely not. I hope that luminaries and blowhards alike continue to get up on their soapboxes in Hyde Park and the pages of my newspaper and everywhere else and make all the noise they want. But I think that getting all up in arms because some people say, nope, I don't want anything to do with you, forgive me, it's fake news.
Hey, John, thanks for joining us today. This is really helpful. I've got a really simple question. What do you do in local media and journalism with this whole issue of trust that seems to be at the center of everything right now?
Gosh, that is a really hard one. You know, a while back, my dad and I were having a drink after dinner, and he was lamenting how under attack science is. How, you know, more and more the average person don't trust, you know, scientists and so forth. And he said he blamed the scientists in part. You know, he said we don't do a good enough job explaining to the layperson so that they can understand us, so that they can trust us. And I said, write a column And he very foolishly took me up on my offer, and he started writing regular science columns in the Standard, and they're good. I don't suppose I should sound all that surprised by that. Sorry, Dan. But he wrote one recently about tribalism. And again, you know, the evolution, one of the reasons why we've gotten as far as we have technologically, societally, as a species is because evolution selects for tribalism. And it's gotten to a point now where it really hurts us, but it's a very difficult programming, if you will, to overcome, because it is so much a part of the human animal to be very tribalized. And trust goes along with that. I can give you 100% straight facts, but if you're from another team, you're not going to trust me. You're going to think I'm telling you something to get one over on you. And it's a huge challenge because we're literally going up against 200,000 years of biology to get people away from that. Now, it used to be that there was enough authority in the institutions of our media and reporting that, you know, there would always be some, you know, scoffing by a few. I don't buy that. You know, they're owned by so-and-so, so they've got to say that or whatever. But it certainly wasn't as virulent and as endemic as it is now. Again, it goes back to my team versus the other team. And because that has been at the highest echelons of our leadership, those flames have been fanned so much in the past few years. I think that the best thing we can do is to continue to tell the truth and to continue to do a good job of that and to continue to point to others when they don't and to not be so darn polite about it when we do. You might think about how 5 years ago, no one would say on NPR, so-and-so lied or so-and-so's statement was false. And now they do it all the time. But it took them years to get round to that place because they were being polite. And, you know, we're in a place now where maybe it's time to get a little bit more bare knuckled in the way that we talk about these things. Just one guy's opinion.
Well, it looks like we're at about 12:45 now. Does anybody have any final questions, or John, any final comments, any wrap-ups?
I do have an ask, if I might.
Please.
Everybody on this call has struck me as, you know, engaged and informed and frankly a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to their understanding of media than most folks are. My ask is this: talk to people. You know, don't allow yourself to fall back into your own tribe and just talk with those folks. You know, engage with people when they get it wrong, or when they are being taken advantage of. Like when you see somebody being lied to and you know they're being lied to, like I did with this Snopes thing, reach out. Politely, of course, we're nice people, you know, but if we don't actively fight these things, if we don't actively fight these untruths, they will fester, they will grow. And the problem we face when we are on the side of truth is something I call shouldism. The truth will out because it should. We're, you know, the truth and our side is right because we should be, because that's what's true. In the real world, that doesn't work that way. What should happen doesn't always happen. So we can't rest on that. We have to be vigilant. And the best way for us to do that, especially in a community as tight-knit as this one, is to talk with folks and be kind when you do it. Because that, of course, will have a better effect. I like to say, you know, chat, don't fight, but don't be quiet either. That's my ask. And while I'm still talking, thank you very much, all of you, for your great questions. I love these conversations so much. This is my favorite part of the job, is connecting with people this way. It's been a real pleasure for me. And thank you for your time and your attention as well, and for reading.
Yay. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, thanks for those final words. I wholeheartedly agree to speak up when you know there's an injustice going on. So yeah, thanks everyone for being here. And if anybody, we are gonna, continue these chamber chats. If anybody has any other ideas for me of another great featured speaker, or you want to be one yourself, definitely send me an email. And our mixer's coming up the first week in September, the first Thursday, virtual mixer. So hope to see you all again soon. Thanks again, John. That was a great discussion.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.